Hello and welcome back to another Doctor Who Big Finish video. In today's Doctor Who Big Finish video, I'll be looking at some short trips. Yes, I guess to sort of celebrate two things. I guess I'm doing it because one, I bought a few short trips in the recent unit sale, and then to celebrate the release of Regeneration Impossible featuring the 11th Doctor and the 12th Doctor, which I'm not going to be talking about in this video actually, because I've got a little project planned involving that short trip, because I would like to do a video talking about the 12th Doctor on Big Finish, sort of overviewing his stories, going from my least favourite to my favourite 12th Doctor story on Big Finish. So that'll be coming in the next couple of weeks. Now, the short trips I have decided to talk about in this video is I'm going to talk about 3 short trips. I'm going to be talking about the Decline of the Ancient Mariner, a 3rd Doctor and Sarah Jane story, museum piece, which is basically the 8th Doctor and Carlindor from the Dalek Empire spin-off, and the Infinite Today, the 11th Doctor and Jo Jones. So I'm really living up to the name of Pertwee Smith 11 in this video, because we've got a 3rd Doctor and 11th Doctor story in there, and McGann, because who doesn't love the 8th Doctor? So the video itself is going to be sort of off-the-cuff reviews, just giving my brief thoughts on these short trips. And I thought, it'd be quite nice to talk about the short trips, because it's sort of a range what doesn't really get talked about, compared to other things, because they just are released monthly, and they're sort of $2.99, so they're sort of good value for money, because the short trips sort of vary from sort of 30 minutes to sort of 45 minutes. So if you get a 45-minute short trip, then you're really getting your money's worth out of your £2.99 of Big Finish. So the short trips, what are the short trips, you might be wondering? Well, they're the most sort of audiobook sort of thing Big Finish produced. Now, the short trips themselves started life in sort of book form in the BBC Books line, and I think they got released on a few cassettes actually, some original stories, and then Big Finish started producing sort of short trip books. This is the Dalek Empire one. I've only got a few Big Finish short trip books, and then they started to do audio ones of them, and they did sort of 4 volumes of them, and then I think it was 2015, they decided to make the short trips monthly, where they release a story from a different Doctor each month, which is rather good. But if you're a subscriber to the main range of Big Finish, I think every 3 or 4 months they release a subscriber short trip. Now, I have reviewed a fair few short trips on the channel so far. I've reviewed the Jagon Lightfoot Revival, the Time Tunnel, I've reviewed A Heart on Both Sides, and I've reviewed a subscriber short trip, A Still Life. I'll leave a link in the description below to all of those and my Big Finish review playlist if you want to check it out. So I thought I'd do sort of a spontaneous video and look at some other short trips. So that's a sort of brief history of the short trips, as it were. So let's go on to the first story, the Decline of the Ancient Mariner. So the first short trip I'm going to be talking about is the Decline of the Ancient Mariner, by Rob Nesbitt and performed by Mark Reynolds. Now, Mark Reynolds is a bit of an interesting reader. When he's trying to be the 3rd Doctor, he sounds more like Trevor Baxter, who plays Lightfoot. And I would say that he does a pretty good job, voicing the different characters. I guess it all depends who narrates the short trip, because if it's Katie Manning, then you're basically going to get a full cast story, because Katie Manning's wonderful. She's very versatile with all the different voices. And I feel like Mark Reynolds does a decent enough job within this story. Now, the main reason I wanted to pick up this story is because it's 3rd Doctor and Sarah Jane, and there aren't many stories featuring those two. So I fancied to give it a go, and obviously Big Finish recently have announced that they are planning to do 3rd Doctor and Sarah Jane stories, so I thought this would be quite a nice little way to see, to get more 3rd Doctor and Sarah Jane. So the story itself is pretty simple. There is a space probe, and NASA lose contact with it for half an hour, and they want to know why they lost contact with it for half an hour. So that's essentially the story. Sarah, the Doctor and Sarah go to investigate above Mercury. So I'll quickly talk about the characters, how the characterization is within this. Now, the 3rd Doctor and Sarah Jane really captured well by Rob Nesbitt. I feel like Rob Nesbitt really has captured sort of the Sarah Jane of season 11, because I feel like season 11 Sarah Jane's a lot different to what we get with Tom Baker, and I feel like arguably Sarah Jane's at her strongest when she's with the 3rd Doctor, because this really does show, well, this story in particular does show sort of her strong, feminist side, especially in stories like The Monster of Paladin, where she's talking to the Queen about such issues. This story started off with Sarah complaining, saying, how dare you assume that the Doctor's a man, or something like that. So I feel like, Rob Nesbitt really did sort of capture sort of the headstrong sort of Sarah Jane within this story. The 3rd Doctor wise, I'm very hard to please with the 3rd Doctor, and I feel like Rob Nesbitt did a wonderful job capturing the Third Doctor, because he's captured that sort of stern authority, especially when he realises who's involved in the actual story. Sort of that sort of grand sort of showman. The Third Doctor, I think, is beautifully captured in this, that sort of stern authority. With the little mannerisms. With sort of rubbing his chin. In Deep in Thought. It really does sort of. I feel like Rob Nesbitt did a wonderful job capturing the Third Doctor. And I feel like Mark Reynolds did a decent enough job capturing Pertwee. With the slight lisp. The story, like I said, is basically the Doctor and Sarah off to investigate why one of the NASA sort of space satellites lost contact for half an hour. So we get the Doctor and Sarah going off orbit on Mercury to see what happened to the actual satellite, which creates some beautiful imagery with sort of a TARDIS just orbiting Mercury, which just creates some really wonderful imagery. So we find out what took the satellite, this Vortex ship, which is basically the advance guard for this sort of species called the Jagan, which basically sort of get sort of technology from that species, sort of evaluate it and sort of process it to see what minerals that planet can offer them, and then they sort of send in an invasion force. So that's quite a really interesting idea. I did enjoy that idea. And we have sort of this character called the Host, which reminds me very much sort of like an Axon, this sort of angelic being. The way it's described is rather wonderful. And the story itself is all sort of linked to the title, The Decline of an Ancient Mariner, which is a poem. So the lines in the actual poem become events within the actual story, which is rather nice. So we've got the Third Doctor name dropping the person who wrote the poem itself. And the story, we get like a little reference to Marilyn Monroe within this story. And we have the Third Doctor, Marilyn Monroe, and Sarah Jane saving the day. I'm not going to spoil the whole twist involving Marilyn Monroe, but it is a really nice little twist. So I think that it's a nice little simple half an hour story, and I think that's what you can really say. I like the idea of this sort of vortex ship sort of assessing, sort of being the advance guard, and the Host sort of being sort of evaluating the sort of planet's assets and technologies and seeing what assets that can be to the Jagans' plans of invasion, that they enslave the species, or else they just destroy the species. So it's a really nice, interesting idea of this sort of junkyard ship in a way, sort of evaluating in all these different technologies. So I think that it's a good enough story. It's a good little half an hour chunk of 70s Doctor Who, which has some great imagery, especially when the TARDIS is sort of flying in space. Really beautiful. And I think that I like how it uses literature to make this story, and I think that's really a strong highlight for this story. I think that's one of the things what I really did enjoy from the actual story. So I'm going to give The Decline of the Ancient Mariner a 7 out of 10. I think that it's a good, solid enough story and just a nice way to pass, half an hour. So next up, I'm probably going to talk about the most interesting short trip, which is a short trip rarity called Museum Piece, which also features in this sort of Dalek Empire short trip book. Now, if you're not familiar with the Dalek Empire series, then this might be one to miss. Now, if you've experienced the Dalek Empire series, then this is definitely one to check out, because it focuses on one of the main characters, what features within it, which is Karlendorf. And I guess this is sort of a sequel to Return of the Daleks as well, because obviously the Doctor features within that sort of story where they go back to Sparadon. So Karlendorf basically visits this museum full of relics from the Dalek Wars, and this is a really good sort of character sort of story from it. It's about, it's about 43 minutes long, so it's a really in-depth short trip really, and I think that it is beautifully done because it's basically him going incognito in this museum and sort of wandering around the museum, and obviously wandering around the museum, and he just sort of stays by the Daleks because he's sort of this battle-worn veteran, that he's lost his friends, he's buried his friends, and he's going to bury his enemies. So he's sort of this very hardy character. I would say Nick Briggs is a really good sort of reader for this, especially this story, because obviously you've got the Daleks sort of feature in it ever so slightly within it, which I'll talk about in a minute. And I feel like he does a really good job bringing sort of the gruffness of Karlendorf to life, that sort of gruff, weary veteran, this war hero as it were. And he really captures the Eighth Doctor, that sort of the rhythm of Paul McGann's speech, which is really brilliant. And essentially you've got this sort of school trip going around the museum, and Karlendorf can sense that they're sort of brushing over, and he doesn't feel like the society could handle if there was another Dalek war. You know, and he sort of wants to know, you know, can the people survive if there was another one? You know, that there's this teacher who sort of brushes aside the sort of horror of it, you know, that there's some sort of deep trouble within the society still and unrest about it, where we see Karlendorf meet the Eighth Doctor. Obviously, Karlendorf met the Doctor in Return of the Daleks, and that makes quite an interesting sort of way. And I think one of the most interesting things about this story is where it's sort of set for the Eighth Doctor, because this could act as a prelude to the Time War, or it's certainly set after to the death, because there is sort of a deep pain and regret between the Doctor and the Daleks. So there's sort of something quite interesting. You know, that there's a line, you know, that I've regenerated, you know, and soon will again. So you don't know whether this is sort of towards the end of the Eighth Doctor's life, or whether he's been fighting the Time War because the Eighth Doctor wants peace. So it makes you sort of question, you know, is this sort of during the Time War, you know, and the Doctor just wants to escape the horrors of the war. And it sort of revealed why he wanted to visit Karlendorf again, because obviously there's parallel between those two characters, which I'm not going to spoil because I feel like James Swallows does a brilliant job within the actual story. So I feel like it's very rich for its characters, especially especially explaining that sort of dilemma between those two characters, and it's really, really good. It's really good. You know, the story sets its tone rather well, but it's quite miserable. You know, the rain's beating down. You know, just it's beautifully. You know, you've got beautiful world building. You know, with the sort of transsolar discs, and in the corner of this museum, you've got a row of Daleks, and nobody goes near them because there's sort of a fear factor that people are slightly wary of them. But you know, not many people go up to the Daleks because there's something about the Daleks what scares the people, that even dormant the Daleks still have this sort of fear factor within it. And there's this moment about sort of a Dalek inside its casing, sort of rebuilding itself, coming back to life. You know, talking about its mind, and you really get to understand the different components, what's inside a Dalek. That it's more than just a mutant in a metal casing, but there's so many sort of electronic components. You know, that it's trying to rebuild itself, you know, to destroy its enemy, which is Karlendorf and the Doctor, when it realises who's involved within it. And I think that's really interesting, that the Daleks trying to sense if there are any other Daleks around, which leads to quite a horrific ending, and quite a gruesome ending, especially the way the extermination, I'm not going to say who dies within it, but it is quite unexpected. You know, quite unexpected. And the way the extermination is described is quite horrific. And the way sort of it sets up and builds up to that moment is brilliant. James Swallows just really captures that, and I think that it is a really good story. Now, if you're familiar with the Dalek Empire series, then you're definitely going to want to check this one out, because it is magnificent. It is really good to it, because it just shows, you know, how worn down Karlendorf is, you know, that he wants peace himself in a way that the Daleks are finished, and this leads to a dilemma between the Doctor and Karlendorf going, look, you take me back, I want to stop their creation, and explain sort of Karlendorf's different ways of trying to devise to stop the Daleks' creation. And then that sort of leads to the argument, you know, that the Doctor has, and how that decision has sort of hollowed the Doctor over the years, you know, that he's lost friends and civilizations have burnt. So I feel like this really does sort of expand on the implication that choice the Doctor made in Genesis of the Daleks. So I feel like it's such a rich and deep story, and, you know, 40 minutes worth of, you know, it's just absolute delight. It's real, it's got a great atmosphere. The sort of descriptive language really does help build this world and picture. You know, that the people have come sort of blasé about the Dalek War, and Karlendorf still on edge because he's this sort of old soldier, you know, but he, you know, old habits die hard really, and he's quite uneasy about the Dalek, and it all leads to a brilliant story by James Swallows. So I think that Nick Briggs does a wonderful job bringing this one to life, and this one is a definite recommend if you are familiar with the Dalek Empire series. I feel like that's where you're going to get your full enjoyment if you've had sort of a bit of information on the Dalek Empire series, so you know about the characters and the world, because this is a really good character piece for Karlendorf and the Eighth Doctor especially, because you don't really know. You know, I feel like this is a really, really good short trip, and it's definitely one of my favourite short trips what I've experienced. So I'm going to give this one a 9 out of 10, a brilliant short trip, and definitely recommend if you are familiar with the Dalek Empire series. So the last short trip I'm going to talk about is The Infinite Today by Sharon Bidwell, performed by Katie Manning. Now Katie Manning, I've mentioned this, does a brilliant job because you're basically getting a full cast story, because Katie Manning is so versatile with the various voices, and I feel like this is a brilliant story for Jo especially, but I feel like Sharon Bidwell's done a wonderful job sort of giving us the older Jo Jones, especially the way the story starts. She's off to Mexico to sort of help sort of the environment. She has a sort of dream, but we open up with the story of her having a dream, but world peace and the environment's all safe, because she's off to fly to Mexico to stop sort of to help the ecological problems within it, from deforestation and all that kind of stuff within it. So I feel like this is very much a Jo Jones story, and I feel like this is a really good story by Sharon Bidwell. Talking about the Doctor himself, the 11th Doctor, Katie Manning does a really wonderful job bringing the 11th Doctor to life within it, because I feel like she really sort of captured that sort of enthusiasm, that sort of clumsiness, that sort of joy in the world, but sort of capturing that sort of stern, sort of old, sort of ancient godlike figure, I guess, because the 11th Doctor was very much characterised to be this sort of old god in a way. And the story really does capture that, and I feel like Katie Manning sort of captures the sort of warmth and charm of sort of that Doctor, sort of has subtle tones of Patrick Troughton, John Pertwee and Matt Smith all rolled into one. So I feel like this is a really good when you get this nice funny moment with the 11th Doctor and yogurt, because obviously the 11th hour, the Doctor's not really a big fan of yogurts, especially in that story, so it's quite nice to have that little callback within it. The Doctor himself's rather logical, especially when he helps Jo, and the reveal of the 11th Doctor within the story is absolutely joyous. The way he's described is wonderful. That the Jo can still, that this Doctor is very different to her Doctor, but he still has the same sort of twinkle in his eye, and that's how Jo knows that that's the Doctor, which is really beautiful. So the story itself is about 46 minutes long, so it is quite a big hefty short trip. For $2.99 you can't really go wrong. So the story is essentially Jo stuck in a time loop, that she's obviously on her way to Mexico, but she keeps arriving back in Gatwick, and people on the plane think she's a bit of a mad woman, but I guess that's a bit Katie Manning, but we love Katie Manning, absolute gem. But instead of arriving in Mexico, she keeps landing back in Gatwick. And every time she falls asleep, events sort of change within the actual story, and each time the time loop gets a little bit bigger, and there's a nice little reference to the claws of Axel, and the great moments between the Doctor and Jo within it, especially talking over the situation. The Doctor's very caring and considerate. There's a really nice moment that, like, no matter how scared you get, Jo, I'm on my way to help you. And I thought like that's really great, but Jo's got to face it on her own, and the Doctor's got to try and work his way to save Jo. Because there's a sort of a twist involving sort of aliens halfway through, which is rather brilliant. The story itself is very sort of melancholic. It's a rather beautiful. It sort of shows you why Jo loves the Doctor. It shows the care and affection she has for the Doctor, especially in the final 10 minutes, which is probably one of my personal highlights for this story. Just the Doctor and Jo in a taxi, just talking about events within the actual story. And I think that's really beautiful, actually, and it is really great. And it's just a really wonderful character piece for Jo. It really is. It shows how Jo has developed, obviously. It shows a much older Jo. And I think that it is a really, really good story. It is a beautiful short trip, and definitely one of the highlights. I absolutely love it. It's just a really charming story, fun little adventure for 46 minutes. It is just a really beautiful short trip. The characterization of the Doctor and Jo, absolutely marvellous. I feel like this is the first 11th Doctor short trip, and if it is absolutely wonderful way to sort of introduce the 11th Doctor to the short trips, to have Jo. It is really great. The sort of whole time loop idea is really interesting and really well handled within the actual story, and to seeing how Jo sort of developed within it and sort of showing that sort of I just think that it is a really good, charming little short trip. So my rating for The Infinite Today, I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. I think that it is just a really nice little charming story featuring Jo and the 11th Doctor. So that concludes this little short trip video. Hope you have enjoyed the various little reviews. I may do a few more of these in the future. So please do comment down below if you want to know if you want me to review a few more short trips in the future. We've got 3 very different stories, in the form of the Decline of the Ancient Mariner being this very sort of traditional, short trip, 30-minute little fun adventure. Then we've got the rather more sort of nitty-gritty museum piece with obviously Carlendorf and the 8th Doctor, with Carlendorf being sort of, I guess, saddened that sort of society sort of brushes over the details of the Dalek wall, that they will never realise the true horror. They will never realise the true horror of that wall, that he's lost his friends, and it really sort of reinforces that sort of battle-hardened sort of veteran. And then we get the rather nice, charming Infinite today. So I feel like there's a nice blend of short trips I reviewed. I tried to do various different Doctors, because most of my short trips I've got are 3rd Doctor ones, no surprise there. So yeah, I hope you have enjoyed this, and if you want to know more, and if you want any more short trip reviews, then please do comment down below, and I'll do more of the sort of off-the-cuff short trip reviews. So thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you next time. So thank you very much, and goodbye.